Hi, I'm Adam Kleinow, and I'm from Carroll Middle School, and I did a PD on investigating the past using primary sources and secondary sources to understand historical controversies. First, we looked at many different ways that you could find primary sources to use for your kids and then make them accessible for your kids. Then we went into how to use those in various different activities in your classroom. A lot of the participants like the ability to find these sources and then be able to use them for their specific subject area, and that's really the main point of this, is that no matter what you teach, there should be something valuable for you. The link to the presentation is listed on the board and the video. So if you have any questions or you want to see the presentation to look at the different links, the link is attached there. So we start with a sample activity on Pocahontas. A lot of the students will be familiar with Pocahontas from the movie, and the sample lesson from the University of Maryland College Park is here. We're just going to go through that briefly to show what I would do if I get this activity for a class. So what this document shows is it tells us a little bit of background information about Pocahontas. Then the student's goal is to look at the numerous sources and figure out if Pocahontas really saved John Smith. So as the students go through the document, you're going to want to have some sort of annotation strategy for the students. This really depends on your school and what you're comfortable with, but anything where they look at the document and can look at keywords and annotate the text as they go on. The first document, as the students read, they will be able to see that it's a very friendly encounter, and also they can look at the sourcing information and see that this was written in 1608. As you look at the second document, you first can see that from the source it was written in 1624, which is a long time after the event happened, and also that Smith, the author, uses much stronger language and word choice to try to convince people in his second document. So students will look at these two different interpretations, and from these two different interpretations, they decide whether or not Pocahontas saved John Smith. Now the different types of activities the students could do, we'll talk about in a little bit, but the main purpose is that they look at the two primary sources and decide what really happened by using different socialized tools such as contextualization, corroboration, in order to see what they believe happened with Pocahontas. So a lot of times these are the questions you can go over with the students. During the professional development, we went over them as a group. And just trying to figure out what evidence is given when it was written, who wrote it, just to contextualize the document. One of the things that you can do is have discussions with the students. These are some possible ideas as how to discuss the documents with your students. It really depends on how much time you want to spend on an investigation and what the goals of your lessons are. You could have them write a persuasive essay, an argumentative essay. You could just have them have a discussion or create a slideshow. It's really up to you. You really can use primary sources to teach any type of lesson you want. You can use it as an introduction. The important thing is really to use these sources and to have the students think about what really happened in history. So next are a few helpful websites. I try to include a list of websites that cover both U.S. history and world history. There are more resources available for American history, but there are still numerous examples from world history as well. When I shared this with the participants, a lot of them just were astonished at the amount of documents that were available that already had investigations and other activities planned. One that I really like is using the Stanford History Education Group. Through their Reading Like a Historian history lessons, they have both U.S. and world history topics, and it's also broken up by time period. So whatever you happen to be studying in your classroom, you could use. So I know one of the topics at the beginning of 7th grade is talking about Gandhi and the partition of India. They have a document set on that. If you teach U.S. history, they have for every time period something different in U.S. history that they could show. So as you can see, again, there are many websites that you can use. There are even more websites I didn't list. The primary source links from teachinghistory.org gives you another list. Some of these websites are repeated, but gives you some other websites. Now, what to do with your students when you have the activities. Both the National Archives and Library of Congress have analysis tools and worksheets that you can do with your students. Also, if you use the iRead protocol that was created by the University of Maryland that is in the curriculum, you can use that as well. Or if there is an annotation strategy that your school uses or your language arts teacher uses, any of those things to break down the source. You want to make sure that you have something that talks about sourcing and where the source comes from. But as long as your students are actively engaged in the text, that is the most important thing. I also found very helpful the adapting documents from teachinghistory.org in case you think that the documents that you chose are too difficult for your students. Teachinghistory.org also has a primary source on how to teach students to read those. As far as organization and discussion, activities, anything that you usually use in a classroom can use the same thing with your students if you're investigating the past. Any sort of graphic organizer, if you want them to have this as part of a larger research project. Any activity you normally do in a class, you can still do with these primary sources or with the investigation. With a focus on literacy, a lot of times writing tasks is how we end up assessing activities like this. So they could write a 5-paragraph argumentative essay, they could compare it to a current event, you could do some sort of research project. You could create park-style questions where students have to go back into text to find the answers. And one activity that I like to do is what I call an empowerment activity, where the students write based on the primary source what they think happened, and then compare this to what the textbook says. And most of the time what the students find is that when they look at the sources, they come up with the exact same thing that the historians came up with that write the textbooks. And I just find that's very powerful because it empowers the students that their ideas are the same that the historians who write the textbooks come up with. It gets them to think about history a little bit more. So iCivics also has a drafting board. It's an online tool that walks students through the process of how to understand issue, take sides, and use evidence. I've had the opportunity to use this since the original presentation. And what I like about it is you can set it to any level. So if your students are already very experienced with using different documents, they can work mostly independently. If they might need help, it can guide them. It's free. It's from iCivics. If you have technology at your school, there's an iCivics app. You can just pull it up right on your computer, set up your classes, and you can also cater it directly to whatever your students might need. So one of the main points of this is I wanted you to be able to look at a bunch of different sources and ideas and create lessons or part of a lesson. If an investigation for 2 or 3 days seems like a lot to start out with, you can always start out by just coming up with using one document and kind of looking at the author's perspective. Maybe you don't have enough time for a certain topic to go in depth in investigation. You could instead just maybe look at a couple paragraphs from someone and say, what is this person's perspective? How does this fit in? How is this different from the other things that we have learned? I also included a link here to the University of Maryland sample lessons. This is for 8th grade history, but they have sample lessons for numerous topics. In conclusion, if I were to use this for the first time, I'd probably start by finding one of the investigations, either from the University of Maryland, or if I were not a U.S. history teacher, I would look at one of the investigations from Stanford. I'd just start with a couple of the documents. I'd have the students just break those documents down using iRead or any annotation strategy. I would set up some time for a turn and talk discussion, such as the one that was featured earlier on the presentation. Then I'd have them just write a 5-paragraph essay where they have to choose one side. That'd be what I would suggest if you're just trying to start out using these. Again, there are many resources already out there. You don't have to invent or find all new documents and edit all the documents. Of those earlier links, many of those web pages have numerous ready-made activities. You might have to change something for your students, but the main parts of those are there. Thank you for watching the recap of the investigation in investigating history with documents. I'm Kleinow. Thanks for watching.